Today, we're diving deep into some really powerful source material. We've got excerpts from a book by Gary King, and this isn't just theory, it's built on, well, over 31 years of research, his personal experiences, and overcoming an incredible 36 life-threatening traumas.
Yeah, it's quite a story. And what's really interesting is how he frames it. His mission, as he puts it, isn't just sharing his journey, but laying out these secrets to true happiness discovered the hard way. He even suggests applying these ideas daily, calling it the happiness experiment. He genuinely seems to believe it's designed, calculated even, to lead you towards real happiness.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. We want to pull out the most important nuggets, the key insights from this material, help you cut through, understand the core ideas, maybe uncover some surprising bits, and hopefully trigger some of those aha moments for you. Let's start right at the foundation then, because the book kicks off with this, well, remarkable personal history. How does he connect surviving all that immense trauma to actually finding happiness?
He really positions it as a journey, one that was specifically born out of like 31 years of intense effort after those traumas. The core idea seems to be that the biggest lessons about happiness weren't found in, easy answers or some quick fix, but were actually forged through that struggle.
And a big part of understanding that struggle, at least according to the source, is really getting to grips with trauma itself. The material stresses that trauma is subjective, right?
Right.
And especially how childhood trauma can embed these really deep unconscious beliefs.
Exactly. Things like I'm bad or I'm wrong, I'm unlovable, maybe I'm inferior. And the source argues this often feeds into what we call codependency, that pattern of relying heavily on other people for validation, for approval, because you don't feel that worth inside yourself.
Yeah, and the book gives some really potent examples of how early experiences can set this up. Just being told shut up at 4 years old, he cites that as causing deep, lasting trauma that can basically sabotage your ability to find happiness down the line.
And physical and sexual abuse are also mentioned, of course, as sources of these buried, repressed emotions that can fester.
There's also that really specific detail about an inferiority complex starting from a birthmark and being called mole as a child.
Yeah, quite poignant. And he notes these memories can be so painful they get pushed down, repressed, maybe only surfacing years later, perhaps in therapy or something.
It sounds like these things don't just sit there in isolation either. The source brings up this concept, exponential emotional compounding. What's he getting at with that?
It's the idea that these emotional hits, especially unresolved trauma, they don't just add up linearly, they multiply. So each new difficulty, each new layer of pain kind of builds exponentially on the last one. It increases the overall emotional debt over time, a bit like compound interest, but, working against you.
Wow, that compound interest analogy is pretty vivid.
Yeah.
So, okay, if trauma compounds like that, how does someone even start to find happiness? The book's philosophy seems different, not like finding a guru or just getting simple answers.
It really is. He explicitly compares finding happiness to climbing a mountain. The wisdom isn't just waiting for you at the top, handed over by some wise old man. No, it's discovered bit by bit during the climb itself, within the struggle. That's where the insight comes from.
And the source makes a slightly, well, maybe counterintuitive point about this struggle too. He mentions the idea of a trauma bond, or even an addiction to pain.
Yes, it's a tough concept. He suggests that sometimes pain can get so tangled up with a person's identity that letting it go feels like losing a part of yourself. It becomes this weird kind of bond, maybe even an addiction, because it's what's familiar. It's tied to who they think they are.
Okay, so building on that internal foundation, the trauma, the identity, the source then looks at how this plays out in our relationships. What's the main challenge he points to there?
A really central theme is the danger of going into relationships, mostly to get validation from other people, precisely because of that lack of self-worth we were just talking about.
Ah, right. Wanting someone to accept you, like you, love you, validate you, treasure you, even idolize you. The book says that's basically a recipe for disaster.
Totally. He calls it a poor foundation, says it inevitably leads to dysfunction down the road. And he also warns against being the rescuer type in relationships, sees that as another path that just ends up destroying things for both people involved.
The source shares a really detailed and pretty harrowing personal story about a relationship with a woman and her daughter. It seems to graph together a lot of these points. Can you walk us through the main parts?
Yeah, it's quite a story. It starts with him offering help, which he later saw as enabling behavior. He calls it a dangerous addiction for him, actually. Then the situation gets incredibly complicated. There's her affair, marrying someone he knew, Then this painful episode with a child alleged to be his. A DNA test proved he wasn't the father, and then the child was just taken out of his life.
And that wasn't even the end of it?
No, she kept seeking help, eventually moving into his home against his explicit wishes, bringing her daughter and the daughter's boyfriend along. It all led to this crushing realization for him that he was being exploited, that he was basically serving as the supply for someone he identifies as a sociopath.
And he connects this experience back to his own internal stuff.
Well, crucially, yes. He recognized he was unconsciously trying to heal his own deep childhood wounds, specifically trying to get the love and liking he felt he never got from his father through her. And the source makes the really stark point that, in his view, sociopaths simply cannot genuinely love or be loved.
Wow. That's a powerful and very difficult personal proof point for his theories, isn't it?
It really is.
So what are the key warning signs he pulls from that experience for you, the listener?
He highlights things like, well, avoiding pleasers and rescuers for a start, looking for partners who've actually done their own work, dealt with their childhood issues. He stresses looking for emotional availability, honesty, accountability, and the ability to both set and respect boundaries. Really fundamental stuff.
The source also talks about profound personal loss, beyond relationships just going wrong. There's the tragic death of his son.
Yes, he recounts his son's life struggle, describes it as kind of carrying forward this emotional dysfunction that had been handed down through the family. He mentions giving the eulogy. Just heartbreaking. And there's a particularly moving detail he shares about a profound dream he had where his son communicated that he was okay. This led to a deep belief for the author that his son is now an angel, actually helping him.
And he also lost his father, the one who was abusive.
Right. He was actually there when his father died. But he describes feeling this profound lack of understanding, just no emotional support from his family during his grief. He directly links his father's abuse to why they could never really repair their relationship before he died. And this section also has a really critical warning, something his PTSD therapist, a Dr. Tom Pettit, apparently drilled into him. Making someone with PTSD feel wrong about their feelings can be genuinely life-threatening. He actually credits Dr. Pettit with saving his life multiple times.
Oh.
Yeah. The material also touches on those classic stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But not like it's some neat checklist, more highlighting how incredibly hard it actually is to move through them.
Life certainly throws things at you that you just never see coming.
Yeah.
The source includes another really devastating story about a car accident he was involved in.
A truly, truly harrowing event. He describes hitting and killing a 5-year-old boy. The boy was crossing the street mid-block with his family. He conveys that immediate shock, the trauma, and then the direct, just gut-wrenching confrontation with the boy's father right there on the scene.
God, moments like that.
Yeah.
They must just change your perspective on absolutely everything.
You'd have to think so.
And it's in the wake of experiences like that and all the others he survived that he introduces what he considers life's most important question.
Right. He poses it like this. What happened to you that made you feel the way you feel? And take the actions and make the decisions you have made. And based on his research, his own journey, the answer, he notes, almost always points back to childhood, often starting with those words, when I was a child.
Another unexpected challenge he faced was physical. A serious leg injury.
Yeah, he talks about being misdiagnosed, losing all the muscle mass in his leg, struggling intensely in physical therapy, surrounded by other people dealing with their own injuries and limitations.
And this is where he had a kind of breakthrough, connecting the physical to the mental.
Exactly. The turning point seemed to come from watching the others around him and starting to question, well, how much of this healing process is just physical and how much is mental and emotional state? So he decided to actively experiment. Using self-hypnosis, which he describes as basically a single point of focus, combined with what he calls auto-suggestion, like an embedded command, to try and influence the healing of his own leg.
That sounds, well, pretty powerful. He references Dr. Emil Keough here, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. Draws on Kou's work, especially that famous affirmation, every day in every way I'm getting better and better. He really emphasizes the incredible power of imagination, which he feels is often underestimated in influencing our physical reality.
Okay, so if our internal state gets programmed by trauma, shaped by relationships, challenged by these unexpected events, the author then turns his focus outward. He argues the external world isn't really helping us. In fact, he suggests it's actively working against our well-being, paints a pretty stark picture of societal issues.
He really does. He identifies what he calls a lack of conscience crisis, or even accelerated human decay. He believes it's fueled by this overwhelming focus on money, power, entitlement, leading people to consciously, almost deliberately, switch off their conscience. And he connects this directly to the rise in behaviors we often label as narcissism, sociopathy, psychopathy. And importantly, he insists that the law of cause and effect applies universally to these actions. No one escapes it.
And he argues we're not just passive observers in all this. We're being actively influenced by different forces. He talks about brainwashing or coercive persuasion.
Yeah, describing tactics like isolation, repetition, and observing that this kind of thing seems increasingly normalized in society. He even sees words themselves being used deliberately as weapons, specifically to divide people, the masses.
And he takes this idea further into more subtle forms of influence, too.
Absolutely. He discusses subliminal influence, stuff that operates below our conscious awareness, and purposeful autosuggestion being used constantly. He notes particular over the last 4 years or so, and he warns this constant bombardment can be deeply self-destructive because it kind of bypasses our conscious filters.
He also brings in the concept of social compliance. What's that about?
This refers to how things like status, titles, fame, fortune, they create these power structures that lead people to comply, or to adopt beliefs that might even be false. He references the Milgram experiment, that famous study showing how readily people obey authority figures even when it goes against their conscience. He argues this kind of power dynamic can be used for manipulation, leading to real emotional, physical, even financial devastation for those caught up in it.
And tying many of these threads together, he introduces another concept: entrainment.
This is a really fascinating idea from physics, actually. Entrainment is the natural tendency for different systems or rhythms to kind of lock into phase and vibrate in harmony, like women's menstrual cycles, sometimes synchronizing in close proximity, or the collective energy you feel in a crowd. He explains how this natural phenomenon is consciously used to modify human behavior on a large scale. He cites examples like Hitler's rallies, and in the modern day, how news and social media can entrain huge populations. Essentially brainwashing people quickly, he argues, without them even realizing it. His point is that our beliefs are largely learned through this kind of pervasive influence.
That's a powerful link between, natural tendencies and deliberate societal manipulation. Given all that, what are his observations on the impact of modern media and smartphones?
He's pretty blunt about it. He sees a critical mass of distraction, says it's drastically shrinking attention spans from childhood right through adulthood. He contrasts content that offers real, quality emotional value with the constant flood of negative stuff, violence, sex, just general negativity that he argues is being relentlessly marketed to us.
And the consequence of all that negative marketing.
He believes this constant push of negative narratives and images, especially, he notes, since around 2019, is actively causing trauma, leading to dangerous behavior, PTSD, increased suicide rates, particularly among teens, depression, emotional breakdowns. He doesn't mince words. He specifically calls smartphones electronic heroin.
Electronic heroin, that's a really strong comparison. What evidence does he point to for that?
He argues they contribute significantly to anxiety, fear, paranoia, and critically, they distance people from vital face-to-face connection. He shares little anecdotes like observing cashiers who seem disconnected or watching people in restaurants buried in their phones instead of interacting as simple, everyday evidence of this disconnect.
And adding to this picture of societal problems, he talks about what he calls truth decay.
Yeah, he sees lying as becoming almost a national pastime. Trust is eroding everywhere. Profanity, bullying, gaslighting seem rampant. And he sees sociopathic behavior experiencing exponential growth. He makes a really stark, fundamental point here. Happiness simply cannot exist in an environment defined by this kind of truth decay.
Let's circle back to that idea of honesty for a moment, specifically tackling the concept of white lies. How does the source view those seemingly small, maybe harmless falsehoods?
He argues very strongly there's absolutely no such thing as an inconsequential lie. He states that every single lie, doesn't matter how small or well-intentioned it seems, is a debit, a withdrawal from your internal account. And just like that emotional trauma we talked about, these debits compound over time, financially, emotionally, physically. He links it back to childhood experiences, where maybe being honest about taking a cookie brought pain or punishment, creating this unconscious link. Honesty hurts.
So even those tiny lies are chipping away at something really vital inside us.
Precisely. And to help people become aware of this, to understand why they lie, he actually proposes something called the 24-hour truth challenge. It's a practical exercise, basically, to confront how often you might bend the truth, even slightly, and start digging into the deeper reasons why.
Okay, so after exploring all these challenges, the internal trauma, the difficult relationships, those unexpected setbacks, and these big external societal pressures, the source pivots back towards the positive, towards building a life of happiness and self-worth.
Yes, definitely. Returning to that central theme, he really reiterates that true happiness isn't found out there somewhere, it lives inside you. He uses the image of a light bulb on his book cover to symbolize this idea, the light turning on within.
And this leads him to the core of his practical advice, what he calls the happiness formula, or HF10, developed over those 31 years. What are the key parts of that?
There are three main pillars. The first one is F for forgiveness. He describes it as a conscious decision you make to forgive yourself and to forgive others. His view is simple. You cannot have inner peace if you're holding on to resentment or hate. It doesn't mean forgetting what happened, he clarifies, but it means not letting it continually drain your inner peace, your joy, your fulfillment. He suggests trying to understand that other people's hurtful actions are often about something broken or wounded inside them.
Okay, makes sense. What's the second pillar?
HT for honesty and truth. This means being rigorously honest with yourself, first and foremost, and absolutely truthful with others. No exceptions, those white lies we just discussed. He sees them as constant withdrawals from your self-respect account. And he also points out that just withholding the truth is, in itself, a form of lying.
Right, honesty and truth. And the third pillar?
SW for self-worth. The source argues this is the most fundamental piece. It controls pretty much everything else in life. Your self-worth is either healthy or it's questionable. And without a solid foundation of healthy self-worth, things like forgiveness and true honesty become incredibly difficult, maybe impossible. He really emphasizes that true self-worth isn't based on comparing yourself to others, finances, looks, intelligence, whatever. It comes purely from within. It's the key, he says, to turning desperation into inspiration. And when you have it, you won't fall into that trap of learn of helplessness or hopelessness.
So F plus HT plus SW that leads to HF10. What does the 10 represent?
That's where the law of compounding comes back in, but this time applied positively. Practicing forgiveness, honesty, truth, and building self-worth doesn't just add good things to your life. He believes it activates the law of compounding for really profound positive results. Like that classic example of a penny doubled every day for 30 days, it grows exponentially. He's saying small, consistent efforts in these three areas compound into massive positive change.
And he sees this law of compounding applying to more than just money or even emotional well-being.
Yes, he believes it's universal. Applies to emotions, behavior, the mind-body connection, even our physical health, which ties directly into his concept of emotional immunity.
Emotional immunity. Tell me more about that.
He basically posits that your emotional health and your conscience, that inner sense of right and wrong, have a profound, direct impact on your immune system and your overall physical health. He even goes so far as to predict that emotional well-being will eventually become the primary standard for judging overall health and longevity. It's a pretty bold claim.
It really is. This all seems to circle back to how we define ourselves, doesn't it? The source talks about an identity crisis.
He frames it as a fundamental choice we all face. Are you operating from a self-destructive identity that's been programmed by trauma, thinking things like, I'm broken, I'm ugly, I'm a victim, I'm weak, I'm unlovable? This programming, he argues, lives deep in the subconscious, which drives something like 95% of our behavior. Or do you consciously choose the identity of a victor, thinking, I'm a victor, I'm free, I can create, be, or do anything? That's the choice.
So it sounds like he's suggesting we might have been conditioned, maybe even subtly brainwashed, to think a certain way without realizing it.
Exactly. He suggests many people were taught what to think, but never really taught how to think critically for themselves. Maybe subtly conditioned to feel like victims of circumstance. The core insight here is powerful. If you change the cause, your inner identity, your inner state, you eliminate the negative effects in your life.
And he offers his own life as living proof that this kind of transformation is possible.
He absolutely does. Having overcome those 36 traumas, he describes himself now as having become free. He shares that he works 7 days a week, not because he has to, but because it genuinely makes him happy and healthy. He links it directly to living his life purpose, which he feels is completely tied to this whole journey of discovery and sharing what he learned.
This whole framework,
Yeah.
it really sounds like something fundamental that's often missing from how we're typically raised or educated.
That's a major critique the source makes. He argues that traditional education often completely fails us when it comes to teaching crucial life skills, like emotional and mental health, how to actually find happiness, how to build self-worth, or even just how our own brains work. He shares an email from a student that just perfectly captures this feeling, finding school dull, focused on conformity rather than individuality or critical thinking, and noticing a lack of real passion from teachers.
That's such a stark contrast to his own experience when he speaks in schools.
Right. He contrasts it sharply. When he speaks in schools, he finds students incredibly receptive. He describes them as being starving for these kinds of insights. He also points out how parenting behavior, including all those emotional patterns and even traumas, often gets passed down across generations almost unconsciously without any real conscious skill development happening.
This whole journey, the source details,
Hmm.
it's quite something. From deep trauma and dealing with external influences to the power of internal transformation, it gives you a lot to reflect on.
It really does. It underscores that connection he keeps emphasizing between your inner state and your outer reality. The world around you, he argues, is very often just a mirror reflecting your internal world.
The source also includes some experiences that definitely push the boundaries of, let's say, conventional understanding, like a near-death experience he had.
Yes, he describes it as a full life review. And what's really striking is that during this NDE, he apparently re-experienced not just his own actions, but also the feelings of the people he had hurt through those actions, especially actions lacking honesty, integrity, or basic morals. He presents this as profound personal evidence for the law of cause and effect, or karma, and says it was a massive catalyst for him, leading him to commit to radical honesty. He states he could not lie about anything after that experience. He also notes how many NDE accounts share similar themes.
He also references interactions with people known for, well, intuitive or mediumistic ability.
He mentions interactions with Tyler Henry, who's known as the Hollywood medium, and also Christy Ferris, an intuitive who he says communicated with his deceased son, Jason. He shares these experiences as further evidence, at least for him, for concepts that go beyond our conventional understanding. Things like transformation continuing after death, the idea that there's no real ending.
And he uses analogies to try and drive these points home, too, like the story of the beach foot race.
Ah, yes, that's a good one. The young man is focused only on winning the $500 prize. That's the short-term external effect or gratification. But the old man's lesson was all about the journey, the perseverance, the cause behind the effort itself. He connects this directly to how people often define success, purely in external terms, money, career status, possessions. And they miss the true definition he offers in the source. Being emotionally and mentally healthy and living with that profound inner feeling, I am free.
That definition of success feels so much more aligned with the core message he's trying to convey.
It really does. And he contrasts those external metrics with those top 5 regrets shared in the last hours of life that people often talk about, which he points out have absolutely zero reference to money, power, or material things. They focus entirely on things like relationships, living authentically, expressing feelings, and allowing oneself to actually be happy.
Finally, the source's own sheer determination really comes through, like the fact he wrote the book using just one finger after one of his traumas.
Yeah, that level of determination is presented as a really key trait. He suggests that when you couple that kind of fierce determination with a clear life purpose, it creates the conditions for what many people might see as unlimited miracles.
This deep dive into the source material, it really shows you, doesn't it, that despite facing just immense challenges, navigating a world full of external pressures and influences, profound transformation is absolutely possible. The author's journey strongly suggests that the power to change your life, to move towards greater happiness and freedom, ultimately lies within your own choices, your internal state, not just your external circumstances.
It's a very powerful reframing, I think, shifting the focus from outside to inside, where control and happiness truly reside.
So here's a final thought for you to maybe chew on based on the source's insights into that law of compounding and the law of cause and effect. If every small lie, every unchecked negative belief is like a debit withdrawal from your internal account, and every act of honesty, forgiveness, or step towards building self-worth is a credit deposit, where does your internal account balance stand today? And maybe more importantly, what does that balance tell you about the future you are actively creating for yourself, compounding day by day?